Welcome to the Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. At Feds for Freedom, we value constructive dissent and healthy debate. The views and opinions shared in today's episode are those of the speaker alone and do not express the views or opinions of the U.S. government or any other employer.
Welcome back to this week's episode of The Feds, where we discussed government overreach and corruption and what can be done about it. I am Stephanie Weidel. Before we begin our chat with Matt Strickland, if you could take the time to check the like button for this episode or follow our channel, we would really appreciate it. Our mission is to protect Americans from federal overreach. If you like what we do and what you see from this podcast, please visit our website where you can make a donation at fedsforfreedom.org. Matt Strickland joins me today for a second time. He is the owner of the Fredericksburg, Virginia restaurant Gourmeltz, as well as an Army veteran, and up until last month, he was a Department of Homeland Security intelligence analyst. Matt, thank you so much for joining me today. It's really good to see you again.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Stephanie. I love your podcast and everything that you bring and put in front of everybody, man. It's messages that don't get told enough. So I'm glad that you're putting that information out there.
Thank you, Matt. That means a lot. So a lot has happened since you were in the studio last. We have a new administration, and I hear that your job has recently changed. So last spring, you were brought on as an intelligence analyst with DHS, Department of Homeland Security, but something has changed recently. Would you like to go into that?
Yeah, absolutely. I took a position as an intelligence analyst at the Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction program at DHS back in March of 2024. So a little bit over a year now. And I did so just because of the fight that I took on at my restaurant beginning in 2020. You know, we didn't follow COVID mandates at my restaurant, and it cost me everything I had in the bank to fight that fight. I eventually won. So it was worth every penny, but it depleted my bank account. So I had to, and I was at a point in 2024, and I still am, where we're ready to open multiple restaurants, but until I see what the economy is actually going to do, I'm not going to. So while my restaurant is kind of in the spot where it's running itself, I thought I'd take the opportunity to accept the position as an intel analyst, just to try to, bring another source of income into the family, and try to build back some of the income that I lost, the savings that I lost fighting the COVID fight. So I did that back in March of 2024. And I started to almost immediately see just how corrupt the DHS, especially DHS headquarters, was. And so as an intel analyst, if you write an intel report or an intel bulletin or an intel note, you shop it around to other intel shops within the U.S. government. So like, for example, if FBI intel shop writes an intel report, they'll send it to us, the DHS, to review. They'll send it to, Department of State, Department of Energy, CIA, all the intel shops to review and see if anybody has any comment or anything to add. Well, I reviewed some of those reports that came across my desk, and I identified almost immediately substantial political bias and actually targeting of American citizens. So I guess you could say I kind of blew the whistle on that. I sent my comments up through my chain of command and let them know that some of these reports had a lot of corruption baked into it and was actually, in my opinion, violating the constitutional rights of Americans. And that's kind of when I came on the radar as somebody that wouldn't sit back and just accept what the government is putting out for a paycheck every 2 weeks. I kind of painted a target on my back as somebody who's willing to speak out. And I'll give you an example. So if you remember Hurricane Helene in North Carolina, how it took everything that the victims out there worked their whole life to obtain. And if you remember, those victims of the hurricane were on social media posting about how FEMA's response to the hurricane and support of the victims was lacking at best. And in a lot of cases, wasn't there at all. So an intel report came across my desk regarding the victims of Hurricane Helene, and it was from an intel shop that said we need to continue to surveil the victims of Hurricane Helene because they're putting out conspiracy theories, and these conspiracy theories could be harmful to the U.S. government and could potentially turn into the targeting of FEMA volunteers that are showing up in North Carolina to help them. Now, these conspiracy theories that they said these hurricane victims were putting out were actually facts. They were not conspiracy theories. They were truths. And just to give you an example, they were saying that these victims were putting out a conspiracy theory that FEMA paid money to house illegal immigrants. Well, that's not a conspiracy theory. That's a fact. Actually, FEMA funded over $300 million to house illegal immigrants. And they also said that it's a conspiracy theory that FEMA doesn't have enough money to make it to the end of the hurricane season. Well, that's also not a conspiracy theory. That's a fact. And actually, Secretary Mayorkas said that himself on the national, on national TV, on mainstream media, on CNN, on Fox News. And so just things like that were easily provable to be facts and not conspiracy theories. So I red flagged that report and I said, hey, listen, we cannot surveil American citizens, especially for putting out information that are actual facts and not these conspiracy theories that you're labeling them as. And also here's the information to back up that everything you're saying that these people are saying are facts. And so I didn't hear anything back when I red flagged that report. I actually had to be proactive and follow up. It took a couple of weeks for me to get an answer. And by the time I got an answer from my chain of command, that answer was, hey, sorry, Matt, that's not our lane. That's outside of our program. So nothing's going to be done about it. That report is going to be published as is. And so I sent feedback about that. And I said, hey, listen, I know our program and our lane is countering weapons of mass destruction. So anything involving chemical, biological, or radiological or nuclear weapons. However, this report came across my desk to review. So I reviewed it. And regardless of whether this report is about a CBRN weapon or not, it actually is in my purview. And it actually, it is relevant information to us in our program because before anything, we're Americans. So if we see a report that is putting out obvious and blatant lies about American citizens and talking about surveilling American citizens because of these lies, then it's our duty. It's our constitutional duty, just as Americans, not even as government employees, to speak up and try to protect the American citizens. Because after all, the only reason we're here is because they're paying us to be here to protect them. And so that kind of put me on the map at DHS as somebody that's going to push back. And I continue to do so in subsequent reports that came across my desk for review that were kind of similar to that. Some not as egregious and some even more egregious. And I'm talking not just in the Biden administration, but also after Trump took office as well. One report came across my desk about the recent Tesla dealership attacks and the Tesla, the vandalism events that were taking place. Well, they put out a report that said, hey guys, nothing to see here. These are all lone wolves, one-off attacks. There's no kind of coordination going on at all whatsoever. So I red flagged that report and I said, these are not lone wolf one-off attacks. Actually, these attacks are very coordinated and they're well funded by specifically 5 far-left groups. And I listed those groups. I gave them all the supporting evidence. And I said, we even have Democrat politicians applauding these attacks. And also the former vice presidential nominee for the Democrat Party, Tim Walz, he was on stage not too long ago applauding the destruction of Tesla as a company and excited about how Tesla stocks were tanking and encouraging people to continue the movement. So these are very coordinated attacks. And like I said, they're well funded. And that's easily provable, and I did prove it to them. And once again, they did nothing about that report. They allowed that report to be published as is. And I just continued to see things like that in the intel community, one after another, after another, after another. And I just couldn't sit back and watch it happen and allow it to happen. So I spoke up, and I was targeted because I did that. I was told that not to review any more reports that don't involve a chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear weapon. And eventually I was taken off the list of people to review intel reports because of it. All because I was calling out corruption within these reports. You would think that somebody would be applauded for that, and action would be taken in a positive manner against somebody that's identifying that corruption. But it's actually the opposite. I started to be targeted. My supervisors at the SES and GS-15 level, because I was a contractor. So my supervisors were a GS-15 and an SES, and it became a very hostile work environment immediately following that, and that happened for a couple of months, and eventually led to me being fired. But so what happened is, after I started calling out these reports and everything, they started looking into who I was and my history, which is something they probably should have done before they hired me. But they sent to my contracting company an article in the Washington Post that I was quoted in. And if you remember, probably, I don't know, a year and a half ago, somewhere around there were two Jordanians that tried to run through the gate at Quantico. Well, I was the one that broke that story. And I broke this story because somebody that worked on Quantico wanted to get that information out. And the officials at Quantico were intentionally trying to make sure that story didn't get out because they worked for the Biden administration. And they knew that it was the Biden administration's fault that those two Jordanians crashed the gate at Quantico, because the only reason they were here is because they came across the open border that the Biden administration has allowed. So they were trying to silence that report from coming out. Somebody from Quantico who did the right thing reached out to a few different people. I was one of them, to get the information out, and asked if I would do so. So I did so. I put that information out, and the Washington Post called me for a comment, and it was nothing substantial that I said in the interview with Washington Post. Basically, all I said was, they asked me what I thought that event was about, and what I told them was, obviously, I have no idea. It could have been. So what the Jordanians said happened is, they said they work for Amazon. They were coming to Quantico to deliver a package. There was miscommunication because they don't speak English. They thought they were being waved on to Quantico, and actually the Marines were trying to stop them. So they continued forward, and they put the vehicle barriers up and stopped the car that way. So I told the Washington Post, I said, obviously I don't know exactly what happened and what the truth is. Maybe that is the truth. Maybe they were working for Amazon and it was just a miscommunication. But these two Jordanians were here illegally. One of them was on the terror watch list, actually. So if that's the case, if it was a misunderstanding, then Amazon, there should be some kind of sanction, some kind of retribution that involves Amazon for hiring two illegal immigrants, one being on the terror watch list.
Yeah.
And then also, I told them that I don't believe that that's what happened. I don't believe that these two Jordanians work for Amazon or an Amazon subcontractor, and thought they were being waved on by the Marines. Because if you've ever enter a military base, it's even if you don't say a word to the gate guard, you know exactly what they're there for, and I don't think you can misconstrue their hand signals, waving you on or stopping you. But anyway, I told them what I believe that it could be is it could be a dry run, because my time in Iraq and Afghanistan, I've seen multiple V-beds that pulled up to gates and detonated. And every time before they did it, they would do 5 or 6 dry runs. And the reason is because they wanted to see what the security response would be before they actually detonated the vehicle. So I told them that I believe that this could be a dry run. And that's basically all I said in the Washington Post. Well, the SES and the GS-15 that worked over me at DHS sent that article to my company that I worked for as a contractor to try to get me fired. They said that I was, so when I sent those reports up, I said, these reports are politically biased, right? Because they were. When they sent that article from the Washington Post to my company that I worked for, they said they want me fired for being politically biased in this Washington Post article. So they used the same exact language I used when I flagged those intel reports. So it was obvious they were trying to send a message to me.
Yeah.
And the company I worked for looked at those reports, and they called me and they said, "Hey, Matt, just want to give you a heads up that your supervisors sent us this this article from the Washington Post that you were quoted in order to get you fired. And we read the article, and there's no violation of the contract at all in any of the quotes in the Washington Post article. So we're not gonna take any further action." But the owner of the company that I worked for told me, he said, "You need to watch your back because somebody there at the office is out to get you." He told me that somebody at the office said that by this time, the Trump administration had taken over, and we had a new assistant secretary. So over the Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction team, the senior executive in charge is an assistant secretary. So the assistant secretary obviously is a Trump appointee. And when he came in and found out who I was, he immediately I guess kind of saw what I brought to the table and pulled me into the management office to kind of be the intel contact for the CWMD team to change things. And so anyway, the SES and the 15 that I worked for, they didn't like that, the relationship that the assistant secretary and I had. So they told my contracting company that eventually I won't have top cover from the assistant secretary. And so that's when my company told me, "Hey, listen, be careful because somebody at your job is out to get you, and they're looking for a reason to fire you." And that's the kind of the environment that I was working in for probably about 3 months. And then what happened, kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, was Cameron Hamilton, who's a good friend of mine, a good friend of yours as well. He's a Feds for Freedom guy.
Yeah, he's our former vice president
Yeah,
for a little bit of time.
yeah, real good guy. I mean, he's got the biggest heart and just a genuinely good dude. And he was appointed to be the administrator of FEMA by Donald Trump right after the inauguration. So he took over FEMA, which is a tall task. And I know some of the things that Cameron was doing at FEMA, and he was doing some excellent things. He was turning FEMA around at a rapid pace. But not only that, Cameron as well as I do, and Cameron is the definition of America first. He was absolutely in support of President Trump's agenda, and Cameron's stance was, "Hey, listen, if you want to eliminate FEMA 100%, I'll make that happen. If you want to reduce FEMA and just keep essential parts of FEMA, I'll make that happen as well. But just let me know what your mission is." He never really got clear guidance from the Secretary of DHS, Christy Noem. And then, so what happened with Cameron is, as soon as he took over as the FEMA administrator, which was in January, he was told by the Secretary's office to freeze all grant payments going out of FEMA. And the reason is because you've probably heard some of the news stories about grants from FEMA going to house illegal immigrants, especially up in New York City at the Roosevelt Hotel. So for that reason, for the corruption that was going on in FEMA prior to the Trump administration, Cameron was told to halt all grant payments. So he did. He halted every one of the grant payments coming out of FEMA. And then, so they had a meeting. It was between the Secretary's office, so Secretary Troy Edgar, Corey Lewandowski, and Cameron Hamilton, and a couple other people. And Doge was actually there as well. And so they were trying to come up with a game plan to fill some of the gaps that Biden left in CBP and ICE. So Biden went on a spending spree right before the end of the administration. Well, I won't say Biden because we all know that he wasn't running things, but the Biden administration purposely went on a spending spree to make sure that CBP and ICE specifically didn't have the funds they needed to carry out these mass deportations. So the game plan they came up with is the secretary's office is she wanted to use some of the grants that were still outstanding to use for these mass deportation flights specifically. So it was in February that they got together to discuss the grants and the unliquidated balances. And it was made clear at that meeting that ICE was in a hole with their budget and they didn't have the funds necessary for this mass deportation plan that President Trump wanted to take place. So, and specifically ICE, ICE lacked sufficient operational funds to procure the flights that I was talking about to deport the illegal immigrants. And I mean, ICE's funding was short like $200-300 million. So just to give you an example of how short they were. And that was only an anticipated shortage. So under normal operating circumstances. But so what happened is they came up with a game plan to turn the green light on for all of these grants that they had stopped. And DHS counsel, so Secretary Noam's lawyers, gave FEMA and Cameron Hamilton the guidance to turn all of these grant payments back on to the states and determine whether these funds could be used for these deportation flights or not. So how it would work is when FEMA sends a grant to a state, let's say you're the governor of Virginia and I'm the FEMA administrator. Well, if I give you a grant for $10 million to do a project and you've only completed $2 million worth of that project, I can tell you to reappropriate the rest of that $8 million for something else, like these deportation flights. So that was the reasoning for turning back on these grant payments. Well, Cameron double-checked, he triple-checked, and he said, hey, do you want me to turn on all grants? And they said, yes, all grants. Well, all grants include the Shelter and Services Program, which was the money that was going to house illegal immigrants. So from DHS counsel to Cameron, the word came, turn on all grants, including the SSP program. So Cameron thought that word, if the word's coming from the Secretary of DHS's office, Cameron assumes that word's coming from the President Trump. So Cameron did so. And it was on Super Bowl Sunday, DOJ found that one of the payments that went out as soon as they turned the grant payments back on went to New York City, and New York City used, I think it was a $60 million payment. They used it to house those illegal immigrants at the Roosevelt Hotel. And DOJ found that on Super Bowl Sunday, and Elon Musk put out a tweet calling it out. And Cameron immediately got a call from Corey Lewandowski, who, let me tell you guys what the breakdown of it. A lot of people aren't even familiar with Corey Lewandowski, don't even know who he is. But so he is Kristi Noem's senior advisor. There was rumors, I mean, going back a couple of years, even to this day, that Corey Lewandowski and Kristi Noem are in a relationship, a romantic relationship, that she's having an affair with him. Obviously, I have no idea if that's true or not. But one thing I do know is if you're accused of having an affair with somebody, the last thing you probably want to do as the Secretary of DHS is hire that person as your senior advisor. It's just not a good look. She was actually trying to make him her chief of staff, but the White House stopped that. So she snuck him in as her senior advisor. Well, I'll tell you from what I've seen personally, and this is not my opinion, this is a fact of what's happening at DHS. Corey Lewandowski is running DHS. Kristi Noem is not. Kristi Noem is running around campaigning for 2028, while Corey Lewandowski sits in on all of the senior level meetings and makes the decisions. So he's the one that's actually running DHS. And there's a lot of issues with that. One, because he's a senior advisor and not an official appointee or government employee, he doesn't have to report financials. So as you can imagine, there's and he's involved in a lot of contracts and such as a consultant and in various different sectors of the government. So it's just, there's a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse that can happen being in a position like that and having your hand in so many different contract pots. But he is the one that's running DHS. So anyway, on Super Bowl Sunday, when Elon Musk put out that tweet that FEMA sent that money to New York and New York turned around and used it for illegal immigrants, Corey Lewandowski calls Cameron and starts going off on him and asking him what the hell that was about, how he let that happen. And Cameron pushed back. Cameron said, whoa, wait a minute. That came from you guys. That came from your lawyers. Your lawyers told me to turn on all grant funds. And I triple checked with them and said, are you sure you want all of them turned back on? And they said, yes. So this is your fault. This is something that, you guys are going to have to take responsibility for. I was following direction that I assumed came from President Trump because it came from your office. And so, of course, Corey Lewandowski, I believe him and Kristi Noem were at the Super Bowl with President Trump at the time of that call. So, of course, he didn't want to take accountability for it in front of the president. So he blamed it on Cameron, and Cameron took that media hit. And of course, Cameron had to take it on the chin because as a FEMA administrator, you don't want to be in the media pushing back against the Secretary of DHS saying that she's lying. So Cameron had to take that on the chin when it was actually not his fault that payment went out and was spent on illegal immigration. So that's where the rift between Corey Lewandowski and Cameron Hamilton started. And the rift continued in different senior level meetings because Cameron was not afraid to push back against Corey Lewandowski. And if you know who that guy is, he's got a huge ego. So he doesn't like when people push back. So in late March, there was another DHS leadership meeting. Well, that meeting was involved Cameron and once again, Troy Edgar, who's the deputy secretary up at DHS. So Kristi Noem's number 2 on paper. And they wanted to discuss the abolishment or reformation of FEMA. Well, Troy Edgar is the one that called for this meeting, the S2. But the problem is he requested that meeting through a system called ESEC. It's a formal interagency information sharing system. So that's where he sent out the calendar invite. Well, the problem with that is multiple people have the ability to view ESEC, not just the meeting attendees. So members of the meeting, once again, were Cameron, Kristi Noem, Corey Lewandowski, Troy Edgar, and then also DHS counsel. So Secretary Noem's lawyers. And when that information for that meeting went out through ESEC, like I said, it was made visible to more than 50 personnel within DHS. And he titled that meeting, FEMA, Abolish or Reform. So over 50 people in DHS knew that DHS leadership, including the administrator of FEMA, were holding a meeting to either abolish or reform FEMA. Well, that meeting took place. And then following that meeting, Cameron, so that meeting, they just discussed a plan to either abolish or reform FEMA. Senior leadership at DHS, Kristi Noem and Corey Lewandowski, they really expressed their interest of abolishing FEMA 100% completely. The secretary actually wanted this action to take place by September. So she told Cameron to abolish FEMA by September in the middle of a hurricane season. So Cameron kind of pushed back on that as well and said, hey, listen, if the president wants FEMA abolished, roger that, I'll carry that mission out. I don't suggest, if you want my opinion and what I know about FEMA, I don't suggest that the timeline be September. Because if we do that, that's in the middle of hurricane season. And the first disaster that happens, the first hurricane that hits America, we get another Cat 4 hurricane down in New Orleans, and it wipes an entire city out. That's going to be on you guys. The lack of response is going to be on President Trump. So I will carry out whatever the president wants me to carry out. It's just my opinion that we slow roll it a little bit. Give me a year, give me 18 months to carry out this mission of completely shutting down FEMA. And they didn't like that. They didn't like that pushback. And this is coming from somebody that knows FEMA. This is coming from somebody that's been there now for, 3 months, that knows it, that has even, before he was a FEMA administrator, had a ton of emergency management experience. Nobody in the secretary's office does. They don't even know FEMA's essential missions. So up until this point, they never even asked Cameron for a FEMA 101 brief. So they don't even know the basic missions of FEMA. And that's how incompetent these people are. Well, they had that meeting, and then immediately following that meeting, I think it was the next day, it was leaked to the media that they had this meeting. It was leaked to the media that the Secretary of DHS and the administrator of FEMA had a meeting to abolish FEMA. And Corey Lewandowski, when that hit the media, Corey Lewandowski calls Cameron once again irate, cussing him out, demeaning him, and blames Cameron for that story being leaked. He calls into question Cameron's character and says he's lying, basically. And Cameron like I do. That's the last person's integrity that you're going to question. He's an honest guy. And it was within 12 hours that somebody leaked that information to CNN and Politico, and the story just caught fire. Well, when Lewandowski called Cameron and accused him of being the one leaking that information, he requested that Cameron submit to a polygraph. And actually later that evening sent Cameron an email stating, quote, his trustworthiness, stability, candor, character, and judgment were in question, and that he needed to consent to this polygraph. So Friday of that week, Cameron said, Roger that, I'll take a polygraph. So Friday of that week, they flew in an interrogator from out of state to interrogate Cameron for 6 hours. And they gave him a polygraph in which he passed. So Cameron passed that polygraph and proved that it wasn't him that leaked any information. And nobody else in senior leadership that was in that meeting was polygraphed. Isn't that wild? Yeah. So that, as you can probably imagine, further soured the relationship between Corey Lewandowski and Cameron Hamilton. And then so at that point, Lewandowski was looking for a reason to fire Cameron. He didn't like Cameron, and it was obvious. And so roughly 2 weeks prior to, you remember, so the reason they said that they fired Cameron is because he went before a congressional committee hearing, and he said that he doesn't recommend FEMA be eliminated 100% because there are essential missions that FEMA conducts that nobody else in the U.S. government does, and they're missions that nobody else in the U.S. government can handle, at least at this point. And if you think you're going to hand these missions off to the state emergency management teams, you're setting them up for failure. And once again, the first emergency that happens in this nation, the deaths and the injuries and the loss of life and property is going to be on you.
Yeah.
And so all he did, and he even said in that congressional committee hearing, like he said many times, he said, I will do whatever the president wants me to do. I just want everybody to know that my opinion is if we're going to abolish FEMA, that you give us enough time to do so, in a responsible way. But my recommendation is that we drastically reduce FEMA. So we just keep a small contingency of FEMA that just is in support of state emergency management teams. And that's the right thing to do because there's classified things that FEMA does that nobody even has an idea about that are absolutely essential and can't go to any other department within the U.S. government the way they're set up right now. So that was Cameron's counsel. And I don't know why that would be such a bad thing, because the reason why you put people in leadership positions is because you want them to learn that program and you want them to give you their honest feedback on what they see the future of that program should be. And that's what a leader is. And you should trust in your leaders when you put them in those positions.
Yes.
So they said they fired Cameron because he said at that congressional committee hearing that he doesn't believe it's in America's best interest for FEMA to be 100% eliminated. But that's actually not the reason that they fired him. So 2 weeks before that congressional hearing, and that congressional hearing was on May 7th. So 2 weeks before that, Cameron received a message from an individual that he would potentially be terminated. So he knew 2 weeks before that he was going to be fired. And he was told that was at the direction of Corey Lewandowski. And also other members of FEMA leadership team were made aware of that as well. And the day before his testimony, so his testimony was on May 7th, the reason they said they fired him. The day before that, May 6th, he received confirmation, Cameron did, from a source that it was confirmed that he would be terminated following the hearing. So the next day, the day of testimony, roughly around 10 a.m., DHS security called FEMA security and informed them to terminate Cameron's building to the access and that he would need to be escorted out of the building. Well, FEMA security responded that Congress would need to be notified that Cameron would no longer be able to testify at the hearing that day. Well, that caused a big issue because they knew what they were going to do. They knew the result. They knew what Cameron was going to say at that meeting, and they knew they were going to use that as an excuse to fire him. So after some back and forth and confirmation by Troy Edgar, the Kristi Noem's deputy, DHS admitted that this notification was sent out too early, and that notice was actually intended to go out later in that evening for Cameron. Yeah, so they pulled it back pretty quickly.
So Cameron was fired. You wrote a social media post about kind of the background of this, and talking about how it was nothing Cameron did, but soon after your own social media post, what happened to you?
Yeah, so I knew the details behind Cameron's firing because I know several people in high positions at FEMA, and I knew exactly what happened. All of them confirmed that, yeah, this is exactly what happened. Corey Lewandowski has had it out for Cameron because Cameron basically has the courage to stand up to him and tell him what really needs to happen in FEMA. And Corey Lewandowski doesn't like that. And there's a lot of corruption going on. And the firing has been something that's coming for a very long time. And it had nothing to do with this congressional committee hearing. So, and I'll tell you, so just a couple quick things real quick, what really led to Cameron being fired. So other than the SSP payments that went out to New York, there's been a lot of other, in my opinion, corrupt things that have been happening behind the scenes at DHS in DHS leadership. So if you remember, there was that New Year's Day terror attack in New Orleans, where that guy ran over a bunch of people and then got out and started shooting at the police. Well, the governor of Louisiana requested a disaster declaration in hopes of support from FEMA and DHS to reimburse the state costs after that tragedy. Well, the disaster declaration was submitted to FEMA, and as per protocol, FEMA submitted it to the White House. There's a lot of history between Corey Lewandowski and Louisiana. I won't go into it all right now for the sake of time, but he's been involved in, several contracts in Louisiana. And not to mention, he was hired directly as a consultant by the governor of Louisiana. So there's a lot of history between Corey Lewandowski and contracts in Louisiana and the governor himself specifically. So Kristi Noem and Corey Lewandowski personally guaranteed the governor of Louisiana that this disaster declaration bill that he was sending to DHS would be paid. And it was a $50 million bill. So the governor of Louisiana requested $50 million from this.
To do what?
Exactly. Yeah, there's no way that this guy running people over, getting out and shooting, cost the state $50 million. There's no way. So there was obviously, in my opinion, a lot of corruption baked into that request. So nevertheless, Cameron, as the FEMA administrator, as per protocol, he sent that request to the White House to get approved or denied. And the president denied the request. And in my opinion, rightfully so.
Good.
And so then Cameron drafted a notice of denial to the governor. But prior to the denial from the president, like I said, Secretary Noem and Corey Lewandowski had already promised and guaranteed the governor of Louisiana that he would be getting this money. And they intended to find a way somehow to reimburse the state of Louisiana for that $50 million. Well, once DHS, once the Secretary, Corey Lewandowski, and DHS counsel were informed of the denial from FEMA in the White House, they weren't happy, to say the least. And they told Cameron to seek other means to find a way to reimburse Louisiana. And in April, they actually directed Cameron Hamilton to process the request anyway.
Whoa.
From Louisiana. Yeah. Cameron denied.
Talk about corruption.
Exactly. So Cameron denied, obviously, and stated that their costs are not reimbursable under any FEMA program, and that the request had already been rejected by the White House, and he is not going above the president's head because the secretary tells him to.
And what was the response? I mean, before he was fired.
They weren't happy. So what I'm telling you is the real reason behind why Cameron was fired.
Yeah.
Because he's got integrity. So they continued to push him to find a way to get this payment sent to Louisiana, and Cameron kept pushing back. And at the time he was fired, May 7th, that $50 million had not been sent to Louisiana because, President Trump denied it. I have gotten word that up until last week, they were still trying to push FEMA to make that $50 million payment happen. I don't know if it's happened now under the new FEMA administrator that took over, but they're still trying to make it happen. So this is stuff that they're doing to subvert Trump's agenda behind his back. And I don't think he knows about it. And this is stuff that the president deserves to know. He has the right to know, and he needs to know, because changes need to be made.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is what we were promised under a new Trump administration, that corruption would be identified and weeded out. What is your opinion now of the new administration?
Well, I try
in light of this.
I wanted to give Trump some time because he's got a lot on his plate and he's only one man. He's busy trying to secure these tariff deals and, implement world peace, trying to make sure we don't go into World War III, trying to make sure there's not unnecessary tax against Iran, because that could lead, to something that the U.S. is not ready for, or any country is. Trying to stop the war in Ukraine, trying to stop the war between Israel and Gaza. So he's got a lot on his plate, and he puts these people in positions to carry out his agenda and doesn't have time to micromanage them. So, I've been giving him a little bit of grace because of that, hoping that it's just the fact of him not being aware how corrupt these people are that he's put in these positions. And I hope that that's the case, but we're running out of time. And there are some things that he's done that's been great. He's led from the front on a lot of issues, like the ones I just discussed. But there's also some things that he's doing that we were promised wouldn't happen in a second Trump administration. Like the insane, out of control bill that this huge, big, beautiful bill continues. And we got a Republican Congress, we got a Republican Senate, we got a Republican in the White House, and we still can't codify the Doge cuts that, Elon and the Doge team spent so much time finding the corruption and identifying where cuts can be made to save us billions and billions of dollars. We can't even come together as a unified party and codify those. So that lets me know that, there's actually no difference between Democrats and Republicans in Congress and the Senate, because if you have control of everything and you still can't make anything happen, if you have control of everything, we still can't bring single issue bills to the floor, that lets me know that you don't want to. And there's only reason that you don't want to, because you're not only okay with the corruption, but you're actually complicit. But
Absolutely.
But Trump specifically, I'm not beholden to Trump or any other politician or any political party. I'm still in hopes that he'll turn this thing around and do the right thing for the American people, but he's not above criticism, and there's some things that he needs to be criticized for right now. One of them is putting people in the wrong places. So there's a lot of people like Kristi Noem that don't deserve to be the secretary of anything. And not because, necessarily of their experience, but because they've proven to us in the 4 months that they've been there that either they're not ready for this position, they're not ready to step up to the plate and take on something as important as a position they've been put in, or that they're complicit in some corruption, because of what I just talked to you about with the governor of Louisiana, or the governor of Missouri asked Kristi Noem. So when all grants were frozen, the governor of Missouri had a call with multiple people from FEMA on the line and asked Secretary Noem to at least turn on grants for the state of Missouri. And in my opinion, to gain political capital with the governor of Missouri, she told FEMA to turn on grants only for the state of Missouri. And so that's what backs up my opinion that she's just campaigning for 2028. She's just running around trying to scrape up as much political capital and support for 2028 as possible. And she's doing it using our tax dollars. And that's what needs to stop.
Now, you've said, as well as many others have said, that we are running out of time, that we've got, months or a year to really affect change. What do you mean by that?
Well, we don't have 4 years like people think, or 3.5 left like people think, because of because Trump being the president. I believe that there's a very good chance that in a year and a half from now, Democrats take back the House. And I think it's a very high chance of that because of the inaction that our Republican Congress is taking right now. And not only that, by the obvious corruption that they're involved in. So why should any Republican voter be motivated to come out and vote for these people who are not doing what they told us they were going to do during the last election cycle, which is single bill issues, which is, cut spending drastically, which is codify all of the Doge cuts and corruption that Elon Musk and his team found, which is to eliminate some of these bad actors in the government that are actually the real problem, because we have a chance right now to clean up the government substantially. And the problem within government, federal government specifically, is not necessarily just the politicians or the political appointees. The biggest issue in government are these high-level government employees, the SESs, the GS-15s, who outlast every administration and hamstring every administration that tries to do something good. These people, they slow roll progress, and they overtly work against the Trump administration. We have the opportunity right now to get rid of those people. We can fire them right now, but it's not happening. And that's what I'm most upset with this administration about.
So people will say, well, Trump just instituted this 80-hour Constitution training for the SESs, and including 2 in-person trainings. So what would you say to people who say, well, he's doing something about it. He's trying to train these SESs up, and that stands for Senior Executive Service Officials, to follow the Constitution.
Well, these people know what the Constitution says. So you're not going to train them on what the Constitution says and believe that they just didn't know. And from now on, they're going to follow it. They know exactly what the Constitution says. They know what the American people want, and they're blatantly subverting that.
Yeah.
So there is no training that will help these people change their opinion on these people. And I don't think they're necessarily evil, but they're risk adverse, and so these government employees specifically, their only mission is to keep that paycheck coming in every 2 weeks and to keep their benefits coming in, because they've been there for 20, 30 years and they have no talent outside of working for the government. There's nothing they can do outside of working for the government. So these people, they're risk adverse in that they don't want to, make waves or rock the boat. So like, for example, the program I worked on, the Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction program, they were asked to make a determination on the origin of COVID. Was it naturally occurring? Did it come from a pangolin a few feet outside of the lab where they were doing gain of function testing, or was it a bio leak, or was it a bioweapon? So those three choices. And being as risk adverse as they are and not wanting to rock the boat, they said it's plausible that it was naturally occurring and it's plausible that it was a lab leak, and both of them are equally plausible. So they didn't want to make a determination, but it's absolutely not a bioweapon. So that's the risk adverseness that I'm talking about, because they don't want any controversy, because they don't want, it's the gray man. They want to be the gray man. They don't want their name. They don't want anybody to know their name. They want to be a SES for, 20 years, skate by, retire, and keep that paycheck coming.
What's the point of them in their job if they're going to be gray?
Well, exactly. There is no point for them to be in that job if they're going to be gray. But they've been doing this for decades and decades. And it's the reason why the Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction program at DHS is going away. So it was just announced that that program is going to be eliminated because they're so risk adverse. And the person that really led that charge for it to be eliminated was Rand Paul. And the reason why he led that charge, one of the biggest reasons, is because of what I just told you, because of their inaction during COVID. It was the perfect opportunity for the CWMD team to step up and make an impact. And
Yes.
and they purposely did not, because they wanted to skate by and be that gray man and just continue their government employment without actually having to work or do anything. And that's what a lot of government employees do, man. They put more time and effort into not doing anything than they would have to put into actually just working and doing your job. But it's actually a skill that they've acquired, was being great at not doing anything and not being noticed.
Yeah.
But those are the people that need to be out of the government. And unfortunately, although the CWMD program is going away, those people who ran that program and are the top level government employees within that program, they're just going to get repurposed into another program. They're not going to be fired. They're just going to move somewhere else and hold up Trump's agenda in that program and be risk adverse in that program. And it's disappointing because, like I said, we got an opportunity right now to get rid of those people.
Yeah, those are the people that can be riffed like that. I mean, where are all these riffs that we were promised?
Exactly.
Those are the ones that should be riffed.
That's
And this is something Feds for Freedom has kept saying, hey, instead of riffing the people that stood up for the Constitution, for their own rights, keep those people and riff everyone else.
And I can tell you from my personal experience at DHS, the ones that are leaving are the ones that we want to stay. The good
But
people are
wait.
leaving. Yeah. The good people are leaving. They're taking their early outs, their early out retirements, because they're frustrated with the inaction.
Yeah.
They're frustrated that there are no RIFs coming to eliminate these people that have been subverting the Constitution for years. And so they're just tapping out. They're like, I tried. I'm done. There's nothing else I can do. And the ones that have been subverting the American people's best interest the past few decades are the ones that they're surviving like they always do. I mean, these people are awesome at surviving. They're great. They're like Democrats in campaigning. One thing that I'll give Democrats credit for is they're great at campaigning and fooling people. Well, government workers are great at surviving and outlasting administrations, and they're doing it once again. And that's really the most frustrating part of this administration, is they're allowing it.
Now, seeing everything especially the past couple months, all the corruption within DHS, blowing the whistle and then being fired for it. How do you view the past service that you've given to this country now? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've always had the right things in mind in my service to my country. So, when I joined the military, when I went to Iraq, when I went to Afghanistan, it was always because I believed I was doing it for the betterment of my country. And obviously we know now we were lied to about the reasons we were in Iraq and Afghanistan. But the men and women that went to Iraq and Afghanistan, we went for the right reasons. We went because we believed the lie that these people wanted to come to our front door and bring the fight to us. And before they could do that, we're going to go to their front door and bring it to them. That's what we believed. And then, eventually we were there just trying to survive, and we were fighting for each other. But now we know the corruption that was baked into both of those wars, and it was all about money. There's no reason for us to be in either of those countries for 20 years. But I was fired from DHS. I didn't even talk about that, but I'll tell you real quick. I made a post in support of Cameron Hamilton on X, and I basically just said that he wasn't fired for the reasons DHS leadership is saying he was fired. He was fired because of a personal rift between somebody that shouldn't have the ability to fire him. And that's all I said in that post. And actually sent that post to the company I work for. And they said, yeah, roger that. That's good to go. There's nothing wrong. No violation of your contract in that post. Well, I got a call from a senior official at CWMD on, I think it was May 14th. It was a Friday, or no, it was a Thursday. I'm sorry. And I got a call from a senior official at CWMD, and they told me, they said, hey, yeah, it was actually May 15th. So I got a call from a senior official that said, hey, Matt, did you post something in support of Cameron? And I said, yeah, I made a post in support of Cameron because the media was just absolutely tearing him up, and they were lying about the reason he was fired. And he said, damn it, man, you gave them ammo to fire you. And I said, I gave who ammo to fire me? And he said, well, I just got a call from one of the Four Horsemen. The Four Horsemen are a nickname that Corey Lewandowski gave to the four guys that basically work for him. So they're on paper, those four people are essentially Kristi Noem's chief of staff, but they're working for Corey Lewandowski, and he nicknamed them the Four Horsemen. So this person told me, I just got a call from one of the Four Horsemen, and they're pissed off about that post you made in support of Cameron Hamilton. They want you fired. And I told that person, I said, hey, there's nothing they can fire me over. That's my First Amendment protected right to post whatever I want in support of somebody that doesn't violate my contract. There's nothing classified about it. There's nothing proprietary about it. It didn't even involve my specific position. So there's nothing they could do about that post. And I actually got off the phone, texting them case law in support of that, let them know, tell these people, these Four Horsemen, that they can't fire me over this post. Well, not even an hour later, I got a call from my contracting company, and they said, hey, Matt, we just received a call from DHS saying that you're not allowed on their property anymore. And I knew it because it was, right after I had just got on the phone with that other person. So I knew what it was about, but I just played dumb. I said, what happened? What's going on? And they were like, Matt, we have no idea. All we were told was that you're not allowed on the property tomorrow. So we suggest you just take a PTO day. And that's all we know. And I said, well, is this common that you'll get a call saying that one of your employees are not allowed on the property, but not even given a reason? They're like, no, this is weird. Never had this happen before. So that was a Thursday. Next day, Friday, I talked to my contracting company, a few times asking for an update. They have no update. They're like, we have no idea. We put in, calls and emails to DHS. We have no idea what the status is, why they banned you from the property. Saturday comes, and I finally get a call from my contracting company, and they said, hey, Matt, finally got word about why you're not allowed on DHS property anymore. They said that they're concerned that you were working on things outside of the scope of your contract, which is something made up. What really happened is they sent my post to the lawyer. One of the Four Horsemen called that person that called me and said, Matt's done. And it was over that post. And they sent that post to the lawyer. In my opinion, this is what happened. They sent the post to the lawyer. The lawyer rightfully told them that that's protected speech and they can't fire me over that. So they told him to find some reason to fire me. So the reason they used was that they were concerned I may have been working on something outside of the scope of my contract. Now, what they're referring to is when the new assistant secretary came in to CWMD, like I said, I was the first person to brief him, and he immediately saw what I brought to the table, and he brought me in to be the intel point of contact on the management team. And the SES and the GS-15 I worked for were jealous of that. I mean, they would ask me constantly, hey, why does the assistant secretary have you in these senior meetings and not us? And I would tell them, I have no idea, man. He's the boss. He puts things on my calendar and I show up. He tells me where to be. He tells me what to work on, and I execute the mission. And I said, if you have any questions, he's your boss as well. Why don't you go ask him? And they were scared of him. They were intimidated by the guy. But they continuously complained the last 2 months I was there to my contracting company. They continuously complained that I was working directly for the assistant secretary and not them. And they made me report every month what I was working on and what meetings I went to. And then it became every week. And then it became every day I had to report to them the meetings I attended, who told me to attend them, the projects the assistant secretary had me working on. But not only that, they had me report to them every conversation I had that day with everybody, with anyone.
Wow.
Which is insane. Nobody else in the U.S. government has those reporting requirements, but it's because they knew the assistant secretary pulled me into those meetings and put me on those projects because he knew that they were incompetent. So they used that as the excuse for firing me, that I was working on things that the assistant secretary told me to work on, the senior executive on that program.
Why is it important to keep freedom-minded individuals in government service?
Well, it's because government service is supposed to be in support of the freedom of American people. That's why. And if you don't have people that are there protecting those freedoms, protecting everybody's constitutional rights, then you get what you have today, which are people that will willingly go along with the corruption within government just to keep their job. You need people who are willing to stand up and lose something in order to do the right thing for Americans. And we just don't have that in government today. And, I stood up and I called out the corruption that I saw within CWMD, and I paid for it eventually with my job. And that's what they're scared of. And unless you build up the courage to realize that if you don't take on that fight today, you're just passing that fight off to your children and your grandchildren in the future. If you're not willing to accept that as being reality, then that's exactly what's going to happen. Is our kids and our grandchildren are going to suffer, and they're probably going to be in an environment that is unwinnable. Right now, I believe we have a chance to win. We have a chance to turn things around, but it's going to take every one of us Americans, true patriots, to stand up and do it.
Well, Matt, this has been absolutely fascinating. You've given specifics, which is exactly what we want on this podcast, and the inside scoop with what has been going on within DHS. I have one last question for you. If the average American citizen could do one thing to combat the corruption that we have seen in our country, what would it be?
Well, I'll break that down into two quick answers. One, you as a government employee, you need to step up and call out the corruption as you see it. And I mean, do it through your chain of command, whatever the right way is. Do it the right way, but do it. Because every day that you don't, and I know a lot of you see it, and I know a lot of you don't report it because you're afraid to lose your job. But you gotta understand that when you do that, you're working against your children and your children's future. So as government employees, stand up and call everything out that you see in the way of corruption. And then for the rest of Americans that don't work for the government, but also including those government workers as well, one thing that you can do that will have an immediate impact within the next few years is stop voting for these quote unquote Republicans that are actually not doing what you voted them in to do. Every time election season rolls around, we have a choice between a Republican and a Democrat. And a lot of times, regardless of how bad that Republican is, we'll still vote for him because we think that person will be better than the Democrat, when actually they're no different. So the Democrats that are voting against codifying DOJ cuts, how are they any different than the Republicans that are doing so? The Democrats that are supporting these insane spending bills, they're no different than these Republicans either. And the only way it changes is if we step up and we stop voting for these corrupt Republicans. And if we keep sending them to office, then how can we expect them to make any changes or do anything different? If Democrats start winning in Republican districts, then hopefully that'll wake Republicans up to what we really want and what we demand, which is action when we send you to DC or to the state capitol to represent us. And it's no different. I mean, you're not going to get any different outcome, whether it's a a rhino or a Democrat anyway. You're just going to realize quicker what's really happening. And so, like, Democrats are going to run us off that cliff at 100 miles an hour. I'd rather that than a Republican that runs us off that cliff at 60 miles an hour, because that wakes people up to what's actually happening.
Yeah. Oh, Matt, it has been excellent having you on again. I am so glad that you had the time. You gave us your afternoon. Thank you. And I look forward to having you on the podcast again.
You as well, Stephanie. I appreciate it. Keep up the hard work.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe to, and share our podcasts. I'll see you next week.